They tried to put it in the beaks of birds and on the feet of birds, all kinds of things, all types of methods to get the cotton across, and all of them failed. The only way they concluded that the cotton could get to America is by human contact. So how did the African cotton become a hybrid cotton with that of a Mesoamerican cotton and be here before Columbus? If he discovered America, is a question. Is that a good question? At what point does possibility become probability? And so it was Professor Ivan Van Sertima who wrote the definitive work to bring it to our attention, because certainly white folks didn't have no intention of bringing it to our attention. And so he wrote this particular book, and it was when I first read this book and saw the brother many, many years ago at Compton College, when it wasn't really even popular to attend lectures at this particular time. They had a small lecture room in the back somewhere, and it was half full at this time. But when I first saw this, it just blew me away completely. The African presence in America before Columbus. Nobody knows about this. Where did he get this kind of information? Where did he get this information from? And did you know that there were white people who were talking about it before Van Sertima, that there were Africans in America? So let's start the concept of navigation. Let's start with navigation, because first of all, a lot of people think that Africans can't swim and that Africans don't have boats. That Africans don't know anything about navigation. So here in the great temple of Amun at Aysut, which we call Karnak today, in this particular temple, there is an obelisk here devoted to a queen by the name of Hatshepsut, designed by a brilliant architect by the name of Sinmut. And this particular brother loved this sister. And she said, "Brother, I would like for you to build me an obelisk." And he said, "Yes." And not only did he build an obelisk, but he built 6 of them for the queen. And then she later said to the brother, "Brother, I need you to build a temple for me." So he designed this beautiful temple for the sister in the cliffs at Baharu, which we call Zesaru. And she said, "One other thing, brother, is it possible that we can bring some trees back from the sacred land, which they call Pawnee or Punt, the God's land, the Ta'a land, to bring it back and plant it in front of my temple so I can be reminded of the place that my spirit and my soul would travel back to when I go to the ancestors?" And so Sinmut said, "Okay, sister, I'll make sure you get the trees." Not only did he make sure that she got the trees, but he led the expedition himself back into the interior. As you see the brother here, he was also in charge of the education of her daughter here. So the brother went on back as he got into his boat, his ships, not his boats, I'm being like the Europeans, call them boats. He got into a ship with a sail on it and sailed all the way down to Ethiopia, to the land of Punt. As you can see, Punt with a question mark here. They're always questioning. I always want to leave it in question. But he sailed down to the land of Punt and got some trees, got into his boat and sailed back up to Kemet and planted the trees in her garden. So don't take my word for it. Let's go to the inscription right there on her temple. He said, Sinmut wrote, Punt was established for him within his estate. Trees of the divine land were planted on both sides of his temple in his garden. Now this is important because him is in respect to Amun, the god Amun. So he had brought these particular, in fact, Queen Hatshepsut, obviously, being the pharaoh, was the personification of Amun. So he had brought these trees back and planted it in her temple, in her honor, to build Punt, to build the Holy Land right here in Egypt, in Kemet. Now this is important that we get this in perspective, because the Nile River is the longest river in the world, 4,100 miles long. Now the United States, from coast to coast, is how many miles? Approximately 3,000 miles, right? So we're not talking about getting in the boat and sailing from here, from Long Beach to Santa Monica Beach. We're talking about getting into a boat and traveling several thousand miles. You can't do that in a canoe. This was a ship. He sailed all the way down to the land of Punt and brought back cargo, brought back monkeys, brought back bananas, brought back trees, and planted all kinds of trees, jewelry, gold, all the gold he could get his hands on he got, and brought it back to Kemet. This is where Kemet had his mines, in the north, in the south, in Nubia, in Ethiopia. There was no gold growing in Egypt. There was a little bit in the Sinai, but not much. Most of it came from the interior. So they were sending expeditions back to God's land all the time. How is it that they came up with the hypothesis that the Egyptians came from the north, when in fact they said that their gods had come and were born in the land of Punt, and they were sending expeditions back here and bringing back trees to create the condition of heaven right there in Egypt? Now, I'm not making this up. James Henry Breasted, Willis Budge, Gerald Massey, Albert Churchward. Go on down the line. All of them concur and agree that this particular land was the Kemetic or Egyptian Holy Land, not Europe as previously believed by detractors. We move on, and we can see that very beautiful palace the brother built in the side of the cliffs and brought the trees back to this land and planted it in her garden. Another brother by the name of Harkuf, long before Sinmut, was sent in the 6th dynasty by the king Pepi back into the interior of Africa, and he wrote the inscription right here on this particular tomb. I went and visited Harkuf's tomb, and it was here that he wrote about how he had gone back into the land of Punt, into God's land, and not only did he bring back all these things, but he brought back a little twa, a little pygmy, which the Egyptians called the dancers of God. They called these little people the dancers of God. These were the people that Osiris could sit on his great throne in the interior of Africa and look down into the forest region, and they pleased his heart and his soul as he would watch them do this dance. I didn't write this. This is what the Egyptians wrote themselves. So one white man named Haile, who wrote a book called Mexico-pt.4, he found out that the Egyptians had identified themselves with the Twa in the interior of Africa, and so he said, okay, well, if the Egyptians were in association with the Pygmies, and we've already painted the Egyptians white, then we better paint the Pygmies white too. So this, because they got to cover all the ground, see? And so this is what he wrote. The Egyptians, who identified the far more ancient Pygmies with their divine ancestors, were full-fledged members of the white or Caucasian race, Caucasoid race. He went on, now you see this is not my book, he went on, he wrote, in brief, the Pygmies are not abnormal people, they constitute a race of normally small stature, a strongly individualized race that are entirely distinct from the Negroes. The prominent brows, the thin lips testify to a primordial connection with Europeans. Like the Pygmies, Caucasians or whites are very ancient residents of the so-called Dark Continent. Negroes are not. So all these years we've been looking for our history. We had Malcolm. We had Elijah. We had Noble Drew Ali. We had Marcus Garvey. We had all these brothers that come up and try to give us the highlights of our past so that we can understand that we're not of America, that we came from somewhere, from some land. They call it the Dark Continent with Tarzan swinging on the vine. But then we said at the moment that we thought that we had it, we found out we don't even come from the Dark Continent either. Where did these poor Negroes come from? Where did these lost souls come from? But you can see that the white folks had a problem. They said the Egyptians were white. Then the Egyptians turned around and said the Pygmies were their cousins. So here's Haile with his cousins sitting in the interior of Africa. And we bear no resemblance to the people around him, and he does. But this is the logic that prevails in their so-called sciences. And this is why I'm a student of Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen. And I almost said Bull before I said Ben Yakinen, because he deals with the bullshit that people teach us. And he comes, in 1987, we had a conference in Kemet. I was there at the conference. The brother put out all kinds of papers, mathematical treatises that he had written about Kemet. The man has been in Kemet since 1938. 30 years before Dr. King was murdered, he had been studying Kemet for 30 years. He was sleeping in tents out in the desert when the Arabs wouldn't let him into the hotels. He's been stabbed, shot, and jailed for teaching Kemet and teaching the truth to our people. And people want to know why the brother is so impatient. Why the brother comes up and he won't adhere to the principles that the I can't even say the word, the academics that they want. He doesn't adhere to it. He has more PhD than all of them. He has been to Kemet down the Nile more times than Sadat went down the Nile. And yet they want to challenge this man because he comes in a way that the people understand. He got people on crack, people on cocaine, people walking the streets lost, don't know who they are. He's going to stand in front of them and read about a particle falls at 32 feet per second squared, and force equals mass times acceleration. We've studied these things. We've studied physics, and we've studied the English literature and all the classics and all this kind of crap that we're supposed to study. But it comes to a point where you begin to understand that unless what you study is associated with your own self and your own endeavors, it doesn't mean anything.